Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And salam sejahtera. Okay, today our topic will be discussing on the allocation of resources, or in more familiar terms, it has been known as a resource allocation in project management. Actually, project management is a very wide area of work, particularly in business. So it might covers many different topics which can be broken into even small particles. Even work of a project manager is not only about giving people orders and telling them what to do. Many people limit their work of a project manager to only supervising their employees and making sure everyone meets their deadline. But in reality, a good project manager knows it's more than that. So the task of the project manager is not only supervising their employees and making sure all the deadline achieved, but actually it is more than that. So resource allocation in project management is one of those particles which make work of a good project manager effective and significant. And even though it may seem simple, it is actually crucial in delivering a good project. So what I can say here is that resource allocation is very important and very crucial to a good project management. Resource allocation in project management is concerned with creating a plan which can help achieve the future goals. And there are many resources which have to be allocated when managing a project, beginning from budget to equipment and tools, to data and project plans. What is this is only a roadmap to the project to the resource allocation, or the roadmap to the more efficient project management. Okay, so we just keep this slide. Okay, so what is the definition of the project management? Basically, in project management, resource allocation or resource management is the scheduling of activities and the resources required by those activities while taking into consideration both the resource availability and the project time. So in a project, construction project, resource allocation is the process of assigning and scheduling available resources in the most effective and economical manner. Any projects, it doesn't matter whether your project is small or you have a big scale of project, you still need the resources, and the resources are very important. Where actually the resources is the task therefore lies with the project manager to determine the proper timing of those resources within the project schedule. So what are these resources is all about? Okay, in project management, resources are required to carry out the project task. I mean, if there is no resources available, for example, the material, the plants and machineries, even the staffing, so the project cannot be implemented in a good manners. So the resources in a project, construction project, it can be people, equipment, facilities, like fundings or anything else that capable of definition required for the completion of the project activity. So why actually this resource allocation in project management is so important? It is very important because it gives a clear picture on the amount of work that has to be done. And it also helps to schedule ahead and have an insight into the team's progress including allocating the right amount of time to everyone on the team. Resource allocation allows a project manager to plan and prepare for the project's implementation in achieving the goals. It is also possible to analyze existing threat and risk to the project. I mean, if you do the risk management in any project, then you must know what is the resource allocation available for that particular project. But above all, a resource allocation in project management helps to control all the workload. So this, as a result, contributes to team's effectiveness at work, and what follows later is a satisfying and exhaustive project. Okay, so this is all the resources in project management. Okay, that has been highlighted before. Okay, so in project management, resource allocation is one of those particles which make work of a good PM effective and significant. So it is impossible to have an efficient project management without all those resources. And even though it may seem simple, it is actually crucial in delivering a good project. So this is project planning and implementation. I mean, if you see from this slide, you can look at your right side where actually there is a resource allocation there, and this resource allocation actually is much related to the financial. Yeah, SFC is a standing finance committee, and EFC is about the expenditure finance committee, meaning the standing finance and the expenditure finance of the project. So resource allocation in project management is concerned with creating a plan which can help achieve future goals. So there are many resources that has been mentioned before. Okay, and okay, again, actually, why actually this resource allocation in project management is so important, because it gives a clear picture on the amount of work that has to be done. And resource allocation actually allows to plan and prepare for the project implementation or achieving goals. And yeah, it can control all the workload, okay, as mentioned before. All right. And resource allocation helps actually to choose the best available resources for your project and manage them throughout the work, so you can avoid under or overutilization of your employees. So that is one of the crucial element of the resource allocation. So it will help a project manager avoid any over utilization of the employees. Okay, so this is just an example of the resource loading chart, okay, which actually can be applied by a project manager to plan for it, resource allocation. And this is just a slide showing how actually an item can be maximized and minimized in terms of the resource allocation provided in a project. And of course, resource allocation involves carefully allocating a range of financial, human, natural, and material resources against the needs of the project. So these requirements can be expected to evolve over the duration of the project as the project moves progressively through its project cycle. And by carefully utilizing only those resources absolutely required at each stage of the project, then the project manager can avoid tying up resources unnecessarily. Okay, so this is a slide showing the strategic planning, how actually you will achieve the goal throughout the allocate resources. And so how to allocate resources when managing a project. So this is one of the important So, since resources refer to quite an extensive list of things and aspects of project management, it may be confusing when trying to properly allocate them, but it's not difficult and requires certain dedication and involvement. So, these are all um, the things that you can do to allocate resources in the right way when managing a project. So, for example, you have to know the project scope, what you will need to achieve, and to be able to properly allocate resources. And of course, you have to know how to identify the resources. For example, a project manager must know what tools, what equipments, etc., which you will need in completing the project. And of course, you have to know how to do a time tracking. So you have to do a deep analysis of the progress and current situation, as well as be able to control it in the real time. And as a good project manager, so one cannot look only at the big picture. And the process of working on a project is not done with task allocation. Once you allocate resources, you have to keep track of all of them. So if you lose at least one tiny detail, your project may fail. And another things that you have to look into is don't over allocate, because your team will experience burnout and their productivity will significantly drop. So then we see what is the common challenges of resource allocation that has been facing by many project manager out there. So the first thing, of course, in terms of the client changes. As a project manager, you might have already experienced how changes to the scope, timeline, or budget can affect project delivery. And with resource allocation, it's actually the same. Having an up-to-date resource calendar will help you to smoothly adjust resources once the changes appear. And the second one is availability of resources. For example, starting of a new project, ideally you could use any resources you need that are available at your company. But what if your company is running multiple projects and you have to negotiate over the same resources with another project manager? Or what if a given team member is out on their sick leave? So availability changes and you have to monitor. Then you have the project dependencies. So allocating resources, you need to include project dependencies, which are a form of a relationship between the tasks or activities and project. For example, in IT projects, there are tasks that can only be done after some other ones are completed. So there's no point to halt resources early on. So this is actually much related to your uh, CPM as well, your project plan. So you have to look at the schedule and what task actually is depends on the other tasks and so on. And then the project uncertainties. So if even if you've checked all the boxes when starting of a project, agreed on the timeline, the budget and the scope, there are always things that you cannot predict. Resource management requires you to be able to respond to project uncertainties. For example, by shifting resources from other projects or reassigning them. And last but not least, the common challenges that always been facing by a project manager is priorities across the company. If your company runs multiple projects simultaneously, you and your peers may have to share limited resources and in a very often in a similar time frame. But even if you manage to negotiate over resources you both need, there may be change in priorities regarding one of the project. So how actually to allocate the resources? Of course, you have to know the project and the project team. You must familiar on who actually involved in your project and who actually is in your team. And you have to uncover risk the early on. So this is much related to the risk management that has been that has been done uh, in the project. And you have to keep track of the project, of course. You have to know what is happening along the way of the project. So as a project manager, you may also be responsible for tracking your project's budget. So it's not only the timeline, but also the budget. So you can do this based on your team's timesheets, multiplying the number of hours they have spent on the project by the rate you charge your client per hour. Again, by comparing estimate with actuals, you can see if you are on budget or not. Okay. And of course, you have to analyze the project using the provided data, eh, for example, from the contractor and so on. And from this, actually, you can have a thorough report, which actually helps a lot, as you can then organize that data to calculate the different metrics. So what actually the benefit of this resource allocation? As you can see, following the right processes and using a complete resource management tool, you can make resource allocation easier and benefit from it in many ways, where actually it improves visibility of all resources across the company. You can avoid under and overutilization much more easier, and it helps to keep bookings more accurate. You know when you're going to buy the material and which material that you can delay, for example, and it's easier to negotiate bookings with other PMs. So this is more on the work collaboration when you have to deal with other projects and another other project manager. So to sum up of my lecture today, you have to remember that sometimes it may be easy or even possible to allocate our resources. It will take time for the project and it certain features to develop, and only then you can allocate the rest on new resources. There is also the option of relocating resources, which sometimes will turn out to have positive effects on the project, and there's nothing wrong with that. However, keep in mind that altering the project too much may influence it negatively. That's why it's important to keep the balance. So